So hello and welcome everybody to today's aged care presentation. I've just got the general disclaimer here that this is just general advice in nature. We're going to come to questions at the end. If you've got any questions that may be specific to your situation, please contact your advisor if you think of these during the presentation. So today we're discussing aged care, an area that many Australians will need to navigate at some stage in their life, but either for themselves, a partner, parent, or another loved one. The aged care system can feel very overwhelming at first. There are different types of care available, government assessments, fees to understand, and important financial decisions to make. As a financial advisor, who will soon be able to provide aged care advice in September, I know that I also have clients that come to me anyway that want clarity about their options, confidence, and if they're making the right decision. So to help us understand the aged care landscape today, I have Kim Guest, Senior Technical Manager from First Tech Team at Colonial First State. So thank you for joining me, Kim. Over to you.
Thanks, Stella. It's great to be here. Yeah, so today we're talking about aged care, and that's one of those areas that many people don't think about until, unfortunately, suddenly they need it. And the good news is that today we're going to work through a number of care options that are available and help to understand how it all works and those first steps they need to make an informed decision about aged care.
Okay, so let's start with the basic, Kim. So when people hear the term aged care, they often think of nursing home, but of course, aged care is much broader than that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Australia, there's really three main categories of government-subsidised aged care. The first one is in-home care, and there's a big emphasis on providing aged care in the home these days. Then there's residential aged care, which is when you move into a residential aged care facility. And there's also short-term care. So when you receive sort of short-term care, usually in your own home, maybe to get over being in hospital or something like that. And the type of care that might be most appropriate for a person depends on their health, their level of independence, their support network, their individual circumstances. So lots of different factors determine which type of care might be the best one for them. And the government's aim is, in general, they really want to help people to stay in their own home as long as possible. So all their aged care is really aimed at helping people to stay at home as long as possible. And then if they have to or they might want to because of their care needs, socialising, all those sort of things, then residential aged care is also available.
Great. And can you briefly explain what type of each care type involves?
Yeah, sure. So in-home care is really where all those support services that a person needs comes to them in their own home. So this could include personal care or nursing care coming to their home, or help with transport to the shops or the doctors or whatever. It could be meal preparation, so Meals on Wheels, for example, coming to their home, cleaning, home maintenance. So all those kind of services are provided to the person in their own home. Next, we have residential aged care, and this is for people who really can no longer live safely and independently in their own home. And so for residential aged care, it provides them with accommodation, care and support in that facility. And then, as I mentioned before, there's short-term care, and this is often when people have been ill, they might have been in hospital, or maybe their carers need a temporary break. Oh, I can see the residential aged care cost slide up there. I don't know if that's just me.
Sorry, I think I might have shared the wrong thing. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Don't look at that yet. There's short-term care. And so that's somebody might have been in the hospital or recovering, or maybe their carer needs a bit of a break. And so they can get that short-term care in their own home, usually, to get somebody back on their feet again.
Okay, so what I often tell clients is that aged care isn't usually a one-time event. It's often a journey, and many people start at support at home, then their needs change over time. Eventually, they moved into residential aged care, pretty much.
Yeah, that's true. So it's not always you pick a type of aged care that's appropriate forever. It really depends on the solution and what might be the situation, and what might be appropriate today. In 5 years' time, when perhaps their care needs increase, then perhaps they need a different type of aged care.
Okay, so let's start with the residential aged care, because that's often where the largest financial decisions arrive. So when does residential aged care typically become more appropriate?
Yeah, every situation's different, but generally speaking, it's when somebody's care needs increase to a level where maybe they can't receive the appropriate level of care in their own home, or maybe they have dementia or cognitive decline. They might be falling. Frequent falls in the home is often a sign that perhaps they need to be in an aged care facility. Maybe they're having difficulty managing their medications and remembering all the different types of medications and when to have them and those sorts of things. Or maybe they just need more and more help around the home and they're relying on family and carers to the point where those people may not be able to provide the level of care they need. Or maybe they're having concerns about safety at home. They're leaving the stove on, those sorts of things. There's lots of different indications that perhaps, being in their own home might not be appropriate for them anymore and that they may need to move into a residential aged care facility.
I agree. And what does residential aged care actually provide for clients?
Yeah, so it provides a broad range of services. It obviously accommodation and meals and catering, cleaning, laundry, personal care, nursing care support. So that's really important. Medication management, social activities. So lots and lots of services. And aged care facilities are all different and all provide different levels of those things. It's really important to look into the aged care facility before you decide which one's the appropriate one.
And what is the first step for somebody considering residential aged care?
Yeah, good question. So when we're talking about government subsidised aged care, everything around government subsidised aged care is accessible, or information is accessible through the government's My Aged Care website. So if you might want to write that down, myagedcare.gov.au is the website. They also have a phone number. And so it's meant to be like the one-stop shop. So it doesn't matter whether you want simple basic care services or more substantial home support or you residential aged care, myagedcare.gov.au is the starting point for all of that kind of information. And it's also where you would talk to somebody usually over the phone and book in an aged care assessment where somebody will actually go through a list of questions and usually come out to the person's home and find out what kind of care is appropriate for that person. And once approved, the family can then start looking at different aged care homes and accommodation options in the area.
So one of the biggest concerns I hear from clients is understanding how much residential aged care costs. And that's a big one. So
It
can you
is,
just give
yeah.
us a high-level overview of that?
Yeah, sure. There can be up to 5 different fees that can apply for residential aged care, which sounds a bit scary, but not all of them everybody pays. And the slide that flashed up before and that we're going to show you again,
I'll put it back up for you. And
it shows the maximum, okay, the maximum of a lot of these fees. And so not everybody, certainly not everybody is going to pay the maximum, but this is to give you an idea of the maximum that could pay. So the 5 different kind of fees that you might be asked to pay in a residential aged care facility is firstly the basic daily care fee. You can see that on the slide there. Actually, everybody who goes into government subsidised residential aged care pays that fee, and it is $66.80 a day. Okay, so it's actually based on 85% of the maximum single age pension. And everybody, even if you've got very low means or very high means, doesn't matter, everybody pays that basic daily care fee. Next, we have something called a hotelling contribution, and this is a fairly new fee. It came in on the 1st of November last year, so it applies to residents who are under those new rules from the 1st of November 2025, and it's based on your means, okay, so your income and asset testing. And not everybody pays this fee, but if you do pay it, the maximum that you can be asked to pay is $22.15 a day, which works out to be about $8,000 per annum. And next we have another new fee, which is called the non-clinical care contribution. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's a very long name for a fee. We call it the NCCC to be short. And it's another means tested fee. You have to have quite a higher level of assets and income to be asked to pay this fee. And the maximum, the very maximum you can be asked to pay is $107.32 per day, which is $39,171 per annum, so quite a big fee. But I don't want to scare everybody. Not everybody pays that, and not everybody pays the maximum. It really does depend on your income and asset situation. And on the very left-hand side, you'll see accommodation payments, and this is the price that you pay for the room. And this can be quite a scary fee because it looks quite high, doesn't it? The average price is 500,000, but it really does depend on per facility. But if you paid that lump sum, and we'll get into this in more detail in a moment, but it's basically you pay the 500,000, but you get the 500,000 back when you leave. Okay, so the rules are a bit more complicated, but at a high level, it's not you pay 500,000 and the 500,000 is gone. You actually pay 500,000. The facility keeps that money. They might keep 2% per annum. As you can see on there, I've got a retention amount, but the majority of that money gets paid back to you when that person leaves the facility. So it's more like a loan to the facility, if you like, than a fee that they keep. And the fifth one, which is not on the slide, is called a higher everyday living fee. And this is if you want extra sort of services. So you want pay TV, wine with dinner, nice things like that, then you might be charged a higher everyday living fee, which is another fee on top of these ones that you might have to pay for those extra higher everyday living services.
Accommodation costs is often where clients need most guidance because generally it involves a large amount of money, as you said, the 500,000 plus. Briefly discuss how the accommodation costs are charged.
Yeah, sure. So what happens is on the very first day that a person enters aged care, they work out their income and asset details. They call it their means tested amount. And if that means tested amount is above a certain amount, then they'll be asked to pay the advertised price, the agreed price for that room. And so it really does depend on the facility. You can see ones that are $1 million plus. You can see ones that are more like 300,000 or 400,000. It really depends on the facility and where it is and how fancy it is and all those sorts of things. But each room has an agreed accommodation payment. And if your income and assets are above the threshold, then you need to pay that agreed price. But the way you pay it depends. So you have choices. You can pay a lump sum called a refundable accommodation deposit, or RAD. And as I said, that amount generally gets refunded back to you when you leave. Or you can pay what's called daily accommodation payments, or DAP, which is really interest at the government interest rate, which is currently about 8.43% on that accommodation payment amount. So you're never actually paying the lump sum, you're just paying interest on that amount. Or you might want to do a combination of the two. And this is where it becomes complicated, if you like, and you might, a financial advisor can really help with these kinds of calculations.
Yes, definitely. So where I see aged care advice being really valuable from just a person's perspective is just the questions that always people ask is, should I sell the family home? Should I pay the full RAD, or would a part RAD be better? And then coming from that as well, there are Centrelink age pension implications, which can affect what you get from Centrelink as well. So that's important. Sometimes there's a spouse at home that needs to stay in the home. We need to make sure they're looked after from a housing and ongoing living costs as well. So there isn't really one answer that suits everybody when it comes to aged care. And it's always just dependent on your situation and what you need and your goals and objectives as well for yourself. And of course, if there's a partner left in the home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There really isn't one answer for everybody. And there's lots of rules to consider, and everybody's financial situation is different.
Yes. So the family home is a large asset that a lot of people have, and that plays a major role in the decisions for aged care. So what should people know?
Yeah, I've come across many people who think that if somebody moves into aged care, you have to sell the family home because you need the money to pay these accommodation payments. And that's a very reasonable assumption, but it's not necessarily the case. It really does depend, because if you sell that home, it can affect aged care fees, how much age pension they get, their cash flow, their estate planning wishes. So there's lots of things to think about when you're deciding whether the family home should be sold or whether it should be kept and maybe rented out. It really does depend on the person's financial situation, what their goals are. If they wanted to leave that home to a particular person in their will, then it might not work out to sell the family home. So it really does depend on the particular situation.
Yes, and one thing that often surprises clients is that the family home can be treated differently under aged care and Centrelink. So can you just explain that?
Yeah, they don't make the rules easy, do they? It is quite complicated. And basically, they have one set of rules for working out how much age pension you get and another set of rules for working out what kind of fees you pay for aged care. And when it comes to the family home, when you leave that family home to go into residential aged care, the rules are a little bit different as to how they figure out how much of that family home is accessible for either the age pension or your aged care fees. If we start off with aged care fees, the good news is that they completely exempt the family home if there is a protected person living in the home. If your spouse is in the house, is exempt, doesn't count at all. And certain carers or other eligible close family members that meet certain criteria, and they are quite specific criteria, if they meet that criteria and they're still living in the house, then the house can be exempt. But for most people, if they're a single person and have moved into aged care, for example, for most people, there is no protected person living in the house. And so for them, the former home does count towards their aged care fee assessment, but not the full value of the house. Only up to the capped value of $214,884 is the current amount, counts towards that means assessment. So that can make a big difference. If you've got a house worth millions of dollars, but only $214,884 counts, then that can be quite an important concession. So that's the aged care rules. Now, if we look at age pension, it's a bit different. Again, if the spouse is in the house doesn't count, that rule stays the same. But if you're a single person, you get 2 years when you move into aged care where the house remains exempt. But after 2 years, that home will become an assessable asset and you'll be assessed as a non-homeowner with higher asset thresholds. So it can be that after 2 years, that can have a big impact on your age pension when that former home becomes an assessable asset.
Great. So the rules are complex and the assessments can definitely change up over time, especially when you're looking at that 2-year rule and you still have a house and it's there and you haven't sold it, being single. So taking the time to understand implications can potentially save stress and ensure that you make an informed decision when it comes to this.
Yeah, that's right. And there's more rules to do with the family home too. We're talking about it at a very high level at the moment. So it really is important to get a good understanding of how the rules work before you make any big decisions about really one of the most valuable asset that most people own when they're moving into aged care.
So let's talk about assessing aged care services in someone's home, because that seems to be like the preferred option for the government overall to do that first and foremost. So there's 2 types of government subsidised in-home care. And can you give us a brief overview of those?
Yeah, sure. So the first one is called the Commonwealth Home Support Program, and it's really your basic level of care. So for people who need a small amount of assistance to help them remain living independently at home, it provides that entry-level sort of aged care support services. So the kinds of things you might be able to get through that Commonwealth Home Support Program is domestic assistance such as cleaning, transport, meals, shopping support. They can do some home maintenance around the home and fix up the gardens, personal care, social support and community activities. So we're not talking nursing care here. We're talking more of your sort of support services to help somebody who's getting a little bit frailer to stay in their own home.
And how do the fees work for these services and support?
Yeah, so it's not so straightforward as it is for residential aged care and for support at home, which we're going to talk about at the moment. The Commonwealth Home Support Program, people are often asked to make a contribution towards it, but the majority of the cost is actually met by the government. It really depends on the particular provider too. They all have different fees and how they figure out how much somebody pays. So it's not like I can give you the rules that will apply to everybody. You really need to talk to the person who's providing the services to you, and they will say, this is how our fees work for this particular service. But the majority of the funding does come from the government for the Commonwealth Home Support Program.
Okay, and can you explain what the support at home program is?
Yeah, sure. So Commonwealth Home Support Program, as I said, is for your sort of basic levels. But if your care needs are a bit higher than that and you need more help at home and you might need some nursing care and you need quite a lot of care, then the next level up is called Support at Home. And the Support at Home program actually only commenced quite recently on 1st of November last year. It actually replaced a previous program called the Home Care Packages program. And it's really designed to help people remain living in their home for as long as possible. When the government has surveyed people, 99% of them say, I want to stay at my own home as long as I possibly can. I don't want to move into an aged care facility. Some people want to, but most people don't.
Yeah.
And so these services are really aimed at if you can, like some conditions don't allow you to stay at home and you need that support in a facility, but if you can, with the kinds of care needs that you have, then the support at home program is supposed to help people to stay in their home for as long as they can. And there are 8 support levels depending on how much care that a person needs.
And what are the costs involved with, so you move the slide.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so the costs involved, the government does pay the majority of the costs for the support at home program, but people who are receiving the services will also be asked to contribute towards the costs. And there's some formulas involved and it's a bit tricky, but at a high level, this slide sort of tells you what you'll pay. So if we look at the first row there, we've got full pensioners. So these are people who are receiving the maximum rate of age pension. So their income and assets aren't terribly high. They're below those lower thresholds. If you're a full pensioner, you pay nothing for clinical care. So that's like nursing care, physiotherapy, those sorts of services. You don't have to make a contribution towards those. But for other types of services that you get for, they call them independents. So this is personal care, social support, they come and take you on outings, all that sort of thing. A full pensioner will be asked to pay 5% of the cost of those independent services. And for the remainder of the services, which they call for everyday living, which is cleaning the house, gardening, home maintenance, then full pensioners would be asked to pay 17.5% of the cost of those services. If we move down to the next row, we can see here part pensioners. So they're receiving a part age pension, or they might not receive the age pension at all because their assets are over the threshold and they might be getting a Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare card instead. These people are asked to pay a higher contribution towards the support at home services. So again, they pay 0% for nursing care. So everybody doesn't have to pay for nursing care, but for services for independence, they pay between 5 and 50% of the cost. And for services for everyday living, they pay between 17.5% and 80% of the cost. So you can see that can be quite a high percentage that they can be asked to pay for those everyday living services. And for self-funded retirees, so these are people who don't even get a Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare card, maybe their assessable income is too high, then they will be asked to pay 50% of the cost of independent services and 80% of the cost of everyday living services. So it really does depend on your income and asset assessment, if you're one of those part pensioners, as to how much you'll be asked to pay towards the cost of these services.
So once again, advice can really help understand these costs and fit with your retirement, like client's retirement income and longer term financial plan when it comes to these costs as well.
Exactly. The support at home program can really help provide that valuable assistance to help people to stay in their home for as long as they can and delay moving into a residential aged care facility. But there are costs involved, and that needs to be taken into account when you're figuring out whether it's worthwhile going through this program and accessing those services or accessing support privately. You don't have to go through the government service. You can get those services directly from private providers, but then you don't get any government subsidies towards those services.
Great. That's everything for today, isn't it, Kim? Thank you so much.
Yeah, hopefully that gave you an overview. There's a lot to take in, isn't there, in a relatively small amount of time. But just to give people an idea of the 3 types of aged care that's available, and my aged care is your starting point for all of that, and that it is complicated. So it can be worth getting some financial advice, some help to understand those rules and what's appropriate.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim, for coming today and sharing your aged care wisdom with us. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. We hope that you found this valuable.
Thank you.